Well, in terms of membrane transport, we now get into some of the active transport types. Primary active transport in this case, where the cell is going to use ATP energy to either pack a cell full of something, like you see over here, or empty it out of something else. Because if we only relied on passive transport, then everything would just spread out, and all parts of the body would look exactly the same. That would completely go against that idea of organization that we need for the body, and homeostasis too. So in order to keep homeostasis and organization, we need to spend energy in specific ways. So let's take a look at primary active transport. You probably encountered a variety of pumps in everyday life, whether that's a water pump, or an air pump, compressing air, or even an oil pump. All of them use energy of some sort to move substances against their natural inclination, usually upward somewhere against gravity. In a cell, this works in a similar way. We need a power source, in that case, that's ATP, and we need a pump, and that's going to be a protein in the membrane, and a protein built specifically for that kind of ion. When we do it this time, we're going to be moving from a low concentration to a high concentration. So exactly the opposite of diffusion and all types of passive transport. Same is the case here. Even if we're pumping something out, we're going from low to high concentration. When it does this and spends ATP, these pumps actually change configuration. Let's take a look. Here's a simple model for primary active transport. You can see that up here we have a high concentration of these ions, and down here a relatively low concentration. So diffusion would want them to spread out this way, but this pump over here is going to do the opposite. Might look like this. We need ATP energy to crank that pump and move that ion upward. If we spend another ATP, it would pump even more. And another ATP, it would do the same thing. Until, obviously, the cell was emptied of those ions. Well, there are many examples of primary active transport in the body. One of them is a calcium pump. When our muscles are done contracting, then a calcium ion pump puts all that calcium, stores it back in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, getting it out of the muscle and causing relaxation. So there's one example. Proton pumps come up a lot. So a proton is a hydrogen ion. We use it in our stomach to pump hydrogen ions and make our stomach more acidic. Plants use it in their roots to pump hydrogen ions out into the soil so it kind of loosens up other ions to allow those minerals to come into the plant. Another immensely important but complicated one in the human body is the sodium-potassium pump. And this is a pump that is unique to the animal kingdom. It's a little bit tricky, but it's important. Let's take a look. The sodium-potassium pump, right here in blue, is a special kind of pump because it moves both sodium and potassium. So we'll see outside the cell, we have sodium in a relatively high concentration, which is how the cell likes it, and inside is low. But inside the cell, potassium is fairly high in concentration, whereas outside it's fairly low. And the sodium-potassium pump is the one responsible for this difference. And it does so by binding a couple of potassium ions, spending ATP energy to dump those into the cell, and then grabbing 3 sodium ions and ejecting them from the cell. So you spend 1 ATP and you pump 2 potassium into the cell and 3 sodium ions out of the cell. It's an interesting pump, way more complicated than the simple single ion pumps, but an important one in animal bodies. Unlike secondary active transport, primary active transport uses ATP directly as an energy source. We know there's a lot of uses for adenosine triphosphate, or good old ATP, inside the cell. But one of them is to power all of these pumps in order to concentrate substances or empty them out of a cell. It's important work in the body, sometimes kind of hard to appreciate, but it is a fundamental task. Well, there you go. There's primary active transport. Until next time, keep appreciating life, even the small stuff.